Today we're going to be talking about firearms consideration for the backcountry hunter. I've been hunting and shooting for practically my entire life, and I have extensive experience in western big game hunting as well as competitive shooting, hand loading, guiding, and gunsmithing, and those are the experiences which I bring to this discussion. Right away, when you think about heading into the backcountry, you think about what type of firearm might you choose or which might be ideal. Lever action rifles are an option, and the modern versions typically will have synthetic furniture, various optics mounting abilities, and other features which make them a possibility. However, they tend to not be chambered in the most effective long-range cartridges for a number of reasons. That's true in most cases, but this still might be something that you would consider. The same is true for modern sporting rifles. These are based on the AR-15 or Stoner design, but that also includes the AR-10 and other designs available from other manufacturers. A couple things to say about this. The ergonomics are fairly unique for this type of firearm. Some people love them and others not so much. And the other point is, while these have the capacity to be as accurate or nearly as accurate as a comparably equipped bolt-action rifle, they tend to be slightly heavier. And that's just something to take into consideration. Most backcountry hunters, however, will be using some type of bolt-action rifle, and there's so many choices and manufacturers. I wouldn't necessarily recommend one over the other, but these are the types of designs which we typically see being taken into the backcountry. As soon as you think about heading into the backcountry with your rifle, you begin to consider the topic of portability, or how one is going to travel with said weapon. This comes down to a few considerations. First of all, we have weight, and weight is a very interesting component because the heavier the rifle is, generally the more stable it is for shooting, and oftentimes easier to shoot and possibly more accurate, but also it's more difficult to carry. So we want to have that balance between the rifle being light enough to carry, but also stable enough for most shooting applications. And what I would recommend, this is just my opinion, a complete setup, again that's with scope, muzzle treatment, or whatever you're doing with your rifle, and a loaded magazine, maybe 7.5 to 9 pounds. That's a really great compromise between something that's ultra light but has possibly more compromises with it, and then something again that's more target oriented and heavier. Length also becomes a factor. The longer any implement is, the greater the potential for a lever arm, and that can make the weight seem heavier. So these compact offerings that we have these days are indeed very attractive. Also, thanks for bearing with me. I'm speaking from the outline that we have for this discussion because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss any of the valuable content. When we're carrying the rifle, we've got a few different things to consider. Are we simply carrying it thusly and we're in an active hunting mode? That's certainly something that happens, but also, are we carrying it with a sling or carrying strap? And there are numbers of these, from leather to more modern synthetic designs. These have value, although one thing I find is if you're wearing a backpack, which I almost always am when I'm hunting, it sometimes is a challenge for the sling to have adequate purchase, and that's true unless you're using maybe an old style frame pack with aluminum portion of the frame sticking up that you can drape this over. That does work, but I doubt that anyone in this community is doing that. We also have the option of various pack manufacturers which make these attachment systems which can allow us to put the buttstock in here and then clip the barrel on the stock, so we essentially have a sling type option. It's easy to access. One challenge with this is you're stuck with one side. You can't switch it easily from side to side. And then a lot of times when I'm just hiking to and from a hunting area, I might just strap my rifle using whatever's available on the pack. So those are some of the options that we want to consider for being in the backcountry. Also, we want to think about how we're going to transport and care for cover our rifle, and that might mean we're using a hard case if there's going to be air travel, or we're even driving on in very bumpy conditions. This is not a fancy one, but it's just one I grabbed as an example. In many cases, though, the soft rifle case will be fine, and there are lots of options with that one could utilize. And when in the field in inclement conditions, whether that's rain or snow, dust, dirt, even heavy brush, pine needles, and we want to protect the firearm from some of those things, a cover might be useful. This is a full-length cover, and it's designed to slip over the muzzle, and then it fits snugly, and it protects the muzzle from infiltration of things, as well as the optics and the action. There are many options for this that you can look into, and I generally do like scope covers. Have those available on most of my rifles. Let's see, what have we got next here? Oh yes, we're going directly into talking about rifle shootability, and that has to do with recoil first of all. So recoil is the kick that you feel from the rifle, and if we look at physics or Newton's second law of motion, the heavier the bullet that this rifle might be shooting and the faster velocity, those are the energy mechanisms, which then would dictate how much recoil energy, which is the weight of the hammer coming back to our shoulder, and then the recoil velocity, how quickly it's coming. And some of that's related also to rifle weight. A rifle of heavier mass will tend to have felt or perceived recoil, which is slightly lower. If you want to learn more about recoil energy and recoil velocity, I would recommend the backfire.tv table, which is available from Jim Harmer on that subject. Steadiness is also related to the weight of the firearm. If it's a heavy firearm, it tends to be very steady, stable, doesn't wobble in the crosshairs when we're on target. Now, obviously, we're limited with how heavy we want to go in the backcountry, as I mentioned before. But rifles that are too light tend to be very wand-like, and they're harder to hold stable. Not impossible, but they actually require a high degree of expertise to shoot effectively. What we're looking for in terms of accuracy, though, out of our shooting system is approximately 1 minute of angle under field conditions. So what that means is an MOA, or minute of angle, would roughly be the rifle being capable of shooting into a just slightly larger than 1 inch diameter circle at 100 yards. And that would increase exponentially with range. If the rifle's capable of that type of accuracy, and we are proficient enough under field shooting conditions, we're adequate, and I like to set that up as a minimum. So some of these things are highly dependent on, again, these shootability factors. Short barrels are something that we're really seeing a lot of now, and this represents the evolution in technology. Historically, rifle barrels would be 22 inches, as in this example, up to 26 inches for, again, hunting rifles in various calibers. Now we're seeing these 16 to 20 inch barrels, which are much more compact, and that makes them easy to transport and store and carry, and particularly to maneuver around in brushy situations. A lot of things that we want to think about with a short barrel come down to two main considerations. A short barrel can be more accurate because it tends to be stiffer, but on the other hand, the more we cut down the barrel, we lose velocity. So for every inch that we reduce barrel length, we are limiting the amount of distance in the bore that the powder can be fully burned and applied to, the energy can be applied to the bullet. And so we'll see losses of anywhere from around 20 feet per second up to possibly 50 feet per second per inch of barrel length that we decrease. Now this is non-linear, and it's variable from cartridge to cartridge, and also it's dependent on some aspects of the bore, but nonetheless keep that in mind. Short barrels are stiffer, but we do lose some velocity with them. The big trend these days is the chassis type designs with folding stocks, and they offer many benefits in terms of being very small and compact and easy to put on a backpack. And then when you open them up, they're just as shootable as any other type of platform. I don't own one of those yet, but I do have one in the works, and I think that there's going to be some applications where I'm really going to like that. There are a few people who are, let's say, looking at pros and cons, will say, well, these can feel cold to the touch if they're made of magnesium or aluminum. That's less true of carbon fiber. And they may be snaggy in very brushy situations, but I've not found that to be a concern for me, and I'm definitely looking forward to acquiring one that I'm working on. As we move along, I'm going to talk about ammunition, and I'm going to tell you that there are just a few components that make up a rifle cartridge. And so this would be a rifle cartridge, and it's made of 4 components. We have a brass, in most cases, case. There are a few now that are being made with steel, but let's say we have a brass case, and in the case head, or here at the base, we have a primer. And a primer is very small, so I didn't bring it out to show you, but it's basically the charge which the firing pin ignites to then ignite the powder. We have powder which is of varying types filling the case, and then we have a bullet which is seated upon that case. So those 4 elements, that's case, primer, powder, and bullet, make up a cartridge. And so technically this is a bullet, this is a cartridge, and this is also not a shell. That's what's loaded into a shotgun. So I just wanted to make sure I'm using the proper nomenclature as we go along. Now, when we think about that cartridge, we have 2 things to think about. First of all, there is the caliber or bore diameter, and that's usually expressed in either imperial or metric, depending on the country of origin, and then the name of the cartridge, that can be based on its use or its founder or things like that. So it's not really that confusing once you get familiar with it. And a lot of these are standardized once they've become accepted by SAAMI. And so that's SAAMI, it's the Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturing Institute, and that's how the specifications for rifle chambers as well as bullet design and cartridge design is done. With ballistics, we have 3 things to think about. We have internal ballistics, which happen within the firearm, and that's essentially the ignition process to the ejecta when the exploding gases and bullet leave the muzzle. That's what's really related to this recoil phenomenon. We have external ballistics, which is the bullet leaving the muzzle and then traveling to the target. And largely there, we're looking at what's known as ballistic coefficient, and the amount of drop that happens to that bullet over distance, and again that's dependent on bullet design and velocity, and also the way it's impacted by wind, and that's known as drift. And so we're always taking those things into consideration because we want to place that bullet accurately upon the target. And then lastly, we have the terminal ballistics, which are the effect on target, or in this case on game. And game is dispatched essentially via exsanguination. So that's blood loss, and that's typical when we make that broadside shot into the vitals or the heart-lung area. And we want to do that efficiently, effectively, ethically, legally, of course, and make that a very expedient process. We also can have CNS incapacitation, or the central nervous system is essentially shut down. That's typical with a high shoulder shot or a neck shot, depending on the range and what we're trying to accomplish in the field. There's quite a bit of tissue damage or hydrostatic shock as that bullet goes through the animal, and that's displacing fluid and tissue and again causing disruption. If you think about bullet design, I'm going to give you 4 categories, and give or take, this is how this works. A match bullet is designed for target use and is highly accurate. It's the most accurate rifle. Now, there are some hybridized match bullets that are now being used for hunting. Typically, it's a long and oftentimes heavy for caliber bullet. And when we think about those external ballistics, we're really looking at these bullets being very much like a javelin as opposed to a beach ball, so they tend to retain downrange energy and be affected less by wind. Well, we have a match bullet, and there are places for match-like bullets in hunting. They're becoming more and more popular. Then we have the traditional soft point or cup and core bullets. These are the standard ones that you're probably very familiar with boxed ammunition, and they are relatively frangible in that they will form a mushroom, but at higher velocities they tend to pancake or fragment, not unlike those match bullets will do. Then we have bonded and partition style bullets. These aren't the same, but they perform somewhat similarly. A bonded bullet has the lead core essentially welded to the copper or gilding metal jacket, and then the partition style has some type of harder metal or jacket material which separates the nose from the shank and allows the rear portion of the bullet to continue to penetrate and do more damage to the target, even if the tip is affected. And then lastly, we've got the mono-metal bullets, and that's actually what this is. This is a Barnes bullet. It's a copper bullet, so it's lead-free. And copper bullets tend to be long and also relatively light for caliber because, again, their density is less because they don't have lead in them. But these are our greatest penetrating bullets, although they don't have the capacity to mushroom to as great a degree. So the wound channel diameter can be smaller with these. These are also highly velocity dependent in that they need to be hitting a target near 2,000 feet per second to get the most performance out of them. So at very long ranges, these may not be the ideal choice. Again, a lot of these things we have to look at testing and trial and error. Now, one of the things you want to do is match your rifle and ammunition to the game that you're hunting, and there's a lot of guides for that, so I won't be overly lengthy in describing that, but we want a bullet that will perform well on the type of game we're shooting at the range that we're shooting. And again, this depends on one's hunting style and shot selection. If you're stalking and shooting animals somewhat rapidly at very close range, but you want to be accurate and effective, you may want a bullet that's either constructed very hard or one that's moving at a slightly lower velocity to get best performance. Whereas at longer range, we may actually prefer a bullet that's somewhat more frangible, but also has the aerodynamics to really perform well at the longer ranges. When we talk about modern cartridge innovation, I would say a lot of this began with the 6.5 Creedmoor, although there have always been options for shooting which balanced recoil and ballistics and effectiveness, but it's certainly become much more popular now when we have a more integrated shooting system with rifles, actions, barrels, optics, and accessories really working together to allow the hunter to be very effective and accurate at numbers of ranges. Generally, we're seeing a lot of the features that I've been talking about giving us the opportunity to have less recoil more accuracy and potentially greater effectiveness than what was available in the past. And the range that I think we typically see is anywhere from the 22 caliber centerfires, such as now the 22 Creedmoor. Moving up, we've got a number of 24 or .244 inch bore diameter options, like the 6mm Creedmoor or the 6mm ARC. There's now 25 Creedmoor. We've got rifles in the .264 or 26 caliber or 6.5mm. That's all the same, and that's like the one that I was holding up just a moment ago. This is chambered in 6.5 PRC. For me, that kind of represents about the most power that I need for most of my hunting applications, and that I can shoot comfortably given some issues that I'll mention in a few moments. There are some 7mm offerings, which is 28 caliber or .284 bore diameter, which you could classify in this, again, modern situation, but those are starting to get into Magnum territory and recoil is going up. So there are a lot of choices. I think that's important. And we always have to be selective with our shots. That's always been true. Now, when you think about muzzle treatments, and so muzzle treatment is something that we use to mitigate recoil. So I mentioned earlier you make your rifle heavier, and that's certainly something, or you can increase the thickness or softness of the recoil pad. That's true. But the muzzle treatments are quite profound. You have two types. You have a muzzle brake, which will divert the exploding gases perpendicular to the bore axis, and that significantly decreases recoil. In fact, muzzle brakes are the most effective way to decrease recoil, and that's very true of what are known as directional brakes, which have large ports that are only going sideways. This one is a semi-radial, so it has holes around most of the brake, but not on the bottom, and that's so if you're shooting prone, it doesn't tend to kick up dust as much. But one of the challenges with brakes is they're loud. They're extremely loud, and so in the field, I always typically will, if I'm carrying a rifle equipped with a muzzle brake, I'll use this, and I'll bring along some extra soft earplugs to give to anyone who's with me, because I think brakes are certainly hearing unsafe, but they're also quite obnoxious, and so it's very important to always use your hearing protection in all cases with shooting, but particularly with a muzzle brake. Suppressors, on the other hand, they will reduce recoil, although typically not to the same extent as a brake, but they also have a sound reduction benefit, and that's extremely valuable for most of us. I still in ranged conditions, I still use hearing protection whether I have a rifle equipped with a suppressor or not. Now, as we go along, I'm going to tell you that I used to do a lot of hunting with heavy Magnum rifles, 30 calibers in particular, and I found them to be very effective. They were somewhat hard to shoot unless the rifle was heavy or using these types of devices. But I have had a shoulder replacement and a reconstruction, and I just am not as tolerant with recoil as I once was. And so I prefer a lot of these lighter calibers, quote unquote, that I was mentioning before. Now, as we look at rifle scopes or give consideration to them, this is an interesting thing because just with any optic, glass quality and internal mechanisms or gears, that tends to add weight and cost. But nonetheless, we have a lot of choices with our rifle scopes. Magnification ranges can vary quite a bit, and for most hunting applications, 10 power may be entirely adequate, or possibly up to 15. But then with range work and being able to practice at much longer distances than you'd hunt at, or just being able to see the targets, going 20 plus is an option. Again, these are personal choices. The bigger the scope, the less you're going to want to tote it around in the field. But there's a sweet spot for most hunters, and I would say that's, at the low end 10, and at the high end possibly up to 18. And there's a lot of great choices in those ranges. Now, the modern shooting system is really what we wanted to get to today. Comes with dial-up turrets. So this allows us to compensate for bullet drop, and that's how we can achieve the accuracy that we are looking for in these systems. These will adjust via minutes of angle, which we mentioned earlier, or milliradians, and I'm not going to get into that too much, but basically we adjust with clicks. So we have to know the range, and that's why we need the rangefinder. And then once we've confirmed range, we can use, in some cases, a ballistic calculator or a dope card, whatever we have, so we know what the number of clicks at the range are, and we can adjust it. Now, there are even scope turrets that you can get which are set for range, or laser etched for range already, so if you know the range, you just dial that number. Now, any of those things can work, and these have gotten so much more reliable and repeatable. Again, it depends on how much you want to spend, but these are great. Now, reticles are the crosshairs within the scope that we're looking through. There are ballistic drop compensating reticles which have hash marks that you can sight in a rifle and get it zeroed appropriately, and then use those. I've used those in the past. I've found them to be reasonably accurate, let's say to 500 yards or so, although not always consistent depending on caliber or ammunition. And again, it's variable, but what I like is a simple crosshair, which is sometimes called a duplex, and then it might have a few hash marks within it, and that's what this one does. Some of the newer scopes, like this one, will come with an illuminated reticle, which can help you in low light conditions, although I don't often find myself needing to use it. Again, there are a lot of features with scopes that we can think about, but once we've figured out what we're looking for in terms of adjustment mechanisms and magnification, we want to look at the mounting system, and this is the base and rings that attach the scope to the rifle. Many variations there. Some of these are a great place to save weight, and we want to have that scope mounted as low or close to the barrel or bore axis as possible, because that helps us with our cheek weld and not needing in the backcountry to use a rifle with an adjustable cheek piece, perhaps. Again, saving weight and complexity. Then we think about zero distance and sight-in height. So I like to zero my rifles to hit point blank at 200 yards. This gives me a lot of adjustability in being able to shoot further out. I'll speak about that in a moment. And also, it means that essentially anything that is either at very close range or out to about 250 yards, once I know that range, I don't need to dial the turret at all. I can just hold and I can hit essentially right where I'm aiming. We're very close to it, and that's really nice to know in hunting situations. In fact, it used to be that was kind of, before we had all these shooting systems, that was kind of how we did things. We figured out what the maximum point blank range was, and that was based on, well, is it a 200-yard zero, or does that, and does that equate with, let's say, 2.5 inches high at 100, and we test all that, and then we'd know, oh, out to about 300 yards, we could shoot within the vital range of a target or an animal and be highly effective. Well, now we can be more precise and we can shoot further. I usually like to recommend, once we get beyond, again, about 250, maybe 300 yards, depending on the setup, that we're dialing for distance and we're holding for wind. And wind's an interesting thing. It takes a lot of skill to get good at holding for wind, and if it's significant, I generally recommend getting closer. It makes things much more ethical and effective. And that brings us into this concept of reasonable range. Every hunter wants to be lethal, but also ethical, and you have to look at what are the conditions in the moment and what's your skill level. So for me, that means depending on the game and the bullet that I'm using, 600 yards is about as far as I would consider taking a shot, and that has to be under ideal conditions. I've shot a lot of animals around that 550 yard mark, but those were all under almost perfect conditions, and otherwise I didn't take shots like that. I've practiced with that rifle I was showing you out to 1,000 yards on steel targets, but I would not do that in the field. Although it's always good to practice further than you think you're going to be shooting, it does make things look and feel a little easier. Now, just finishing up, and I know I was going quickly because there's so much to talk about, I'll speak about a few practical tips. Shooting aids. So that might be a bipod, or it could be even a tripod with an Arca rail setup. You can use these things, and I've kind of come full circle in that I've used a lot of these in the field, but I like to carry less and less, and so many times I'm just building my shooting position, shooting platform using my backpack, rocks, logs, articles of clothing, whatever, and I can usually make a very stable platform that's effective without needing. Well, I'll take the backpack in open country or cross canyon situation, or the bipod, open country or cross canyon situations. At the shooting range, you may benefit from having some form of a rest, a rear bag and a platform. If you're shooting from the bench, if you're shooting prone, bipods are great. Also, you can get any number of these types of filled rests, which are very useful. My suggestion is always to join a shooting range. It gives you the ability to go on a regular basis and practice, and also really work with your data. There are applications where you can go out into the backcountry and do some field type shooting practice, but I think we have to be very selective of how and where we do that, and very courteous to other recreational users. So join a range by all means. Be prepared to buy and test multiple brands and types of ammunition until you find the one that shoots best in your rifle and falls within the category that you're looking for. Chronographs are essential for testing that ammo and determining what the range what the velocity will be, and that way you can use your ballistics calculator on your phone, or again, whatever you're utilizing, to be very precise in how you're adjusting the shooting system. Spotting scopes are an interesting beast because they're big and they're heavy. They're very useful for sheep hunters who have to look at very long ranges and judge animals, but I don't take these into the field as much as I once did. And then your binocular is quite critical to utilize. And most hunters are going to go somewhere between maybe an 8 power, let's say 8x42 is very classic, and that'll get you a lot of close to mid-range work and in the woods and whatnot. And then you get longer range. 10 is the standard, possibly up to 12 with a handheld. Now you can get binoculars which are tripod mounted. Those can go 15, 18 power. They have an application, but again, it starts to get into spotting scope territory. You need a laser rangefinder, and I have a couple of different types that are handheld and separate, but I've really been enjoying using this SIG product. It's an integrated laser rangefinder within the binocular. This was 10x42. I really like that. It adds some simplicity to my setup, and it's a quality product. You're probably going to want some cleaning equipment to take care of and maintain this rifle, and also to preserve its it's consistent accuracy and shootability, and even lifespan. So some type of cleaning rest that you can secure the rifle with is a great idea, and you're going to want a coated cleaning rod with the appropriate patches and jags, and look at the different types of solvents which are available, many of which these days are moving in the direction of non-toxic or less toxic, and I think that's really where we should all be going in the world of chemicals. Hearing protection, always important, and for your practice, whether you have electronic ones or the standard ones, these are fine. In fact, if you're shooting with a muzzle brake, it's never a bad idea to put a phone plug in your ear and then muffs over, and I will find myself doing that from time to time as well. Basically, we just need to have an open mind to utilize all of these various tools to make our experience effective and enjoyable. And also, we want to be very disciplined with practice. You can see how there's a lot of gear and accessories that goes into this, and you have to almost be a gearhead and love it. When you're shooting in the field, probably the tip I'll give you here is stay in the scope. Cycle the action and wait and watch and make sure that animal is down and deceased before you start unloading and packing up and high-fiving or anything else that you're going to do, because again, we want to be sure that we've dispatched the animal expediently and also not get into any type of rodeo situation. And ultimately, just like everything that we do, we want to be a student of what it is that we're doing and stay responsible and have fun. So those are some considerations regarding firearms for backcountry hunters. Thanks very much for joining me.